Thank you so much, Aditi and team. We soon now have with us joining Her Excellency Miss Veronique Roger Lacan. We'll just wait for Ambassador Lacan to join in on the screen.
Agnes, just to continue with your question, I have one of the more fun lectures designed on exactly what you asked about. And when we were designing today's workshop, I was actually torn between using that lecture for our session or circularity for our session. But I'm sure over the next 3-4 months, we're going to have a lot of discussions on this. So I'm looking forward to those already. All right, Arpit, over to you.
All right. Hello, hello, Ambassador Lacan. How are you doing?
Good afternoon. I'm fine. Thank you. Good to see you all.
Thank you so much. Well, hi, everybody, once again. So you heard from our Joint Director, Mr. Ishan Chaturvedi, and now our guest of honor, Her Excellency Miss Veronique Roger Lacan is here with us. She is the Permanent Delegate of France to UNESCO. At the French Ministries of Europe and Foreign Affairs and Defense, she was the Ambassador Permanent Representative of France to the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE earlier. She's also been the Ambassador Special Representative for combating sea piracy in the Gulf of Aden, the Gulf of Guinea, and the Strait of Malacca. She was the head of Interministerial Mali Sahel Mission, the Deputy Director for South Asia, Advisor for Strategic Affairs to the French Minister of Foreign Affairs, Advisor for International Affairs to the French Secretary of State for Emergency Humanitarian Action. She has also been a part of international organizations and other various roles, including at NATO, where we have a lot of our mentors coming from. She's been there with the Defense Planning and Operations Division. Ambassador Lacan has also been part of the regional delegation of Office of the United Nations High Commissioner of Refugees for Southeast Asia. She has studied law at the University of Paris, Panthéon-Sorbonne, and is the founder of the Encourage Excellencies program within Women in International Security. And I also have to tell you that we have mentors as part of this fellowship coming from the same organization, Women in International Security. Ambassador is also the member of the jury panel for the Culture for Peace Prize of Foundation Le Carré and Foundation Chirac, and a mentor for Charitable Association La Source. Thank you so much, Your Excellency, for joining us today. And we are going to be talking about education in the 21st century. And we are all really, really excited to be hearing your thoughts on the subject. Thank you so much, Ambassador.
Thank you very much. So you mean that now I start. How much do you want me to speak, and how long is the whole session going to last?
Sure, Ambassador. So the whole of the session is planned for 1 hour and 15 minutes. The initial speech from your side could range between 20 minutes to 30 minutes, after which we'll do a question answer round, and we'll introduce you to some of our members, the fellows, the alumni over here. So that's the idea over here, Ambassador. But let me also, before you begin and before I invite you to speak, let me tell you a little bit about our fellowship program in person. Ambassador Lacan, this is the Global Policy, Diplomacy and Sustainability Fellowship, or as we call it, the GPODS Fellowship. And the idea behind this fellowship is that we integrate the perspectives on public policy, diplomacy, and sustainability. And we bring in a number of mentors from all over the world to train and to mentor a young generation of policymakers, of diplomats, of folks working in various NGOs. So all of the people whom you find over here in the room, they are, young professionals from different parts of the world who are working on public policy, diplomacy, and sustainability.
Okay, thank you so much, and great to see you all. So the title of the conference, I understand, is Education in the 21st Century. I might expand a little bit also on the way things are being negotiated in UNESCO, because this is where I work, and I'm much more into negotiations of those type of issues than on the issues themselves. Because I myself, I'm not, as you have seen in my CV, I'm not a specialist of education, but more of a multilateral negotiator. Including in the field of strategic affairs. But at the same time, education, we see the way France sees education in the 21st century as discussed in UNESCO. We see this issue as, in fact, a strategic issue. Many specialists or many people outside our diplomatic circles believe that education is a development issue only and not a strategic issue. But you see in the mandate of UNESCO that it's the United Nations Organization for Security, Education, Culture, and in the Constitutive Act of UNESCO, adopted on the 17th November 1945, it is mentioned that UNESCO has been established by its founders as a contribution to peace and security. So UNESCO, in a way, is also a security organization. And I must confess that this is the way, with my background, that I use it. And let me say from the outset that by putting things in this manner, we have already some type of I would not say confrontation, because I don't want, after only 2 minutes of discussion with you, to talk about confrontation.
Sure.
But at the same time, this is a way of putting things in a different manner with other parts of the world. For example, if we take the example of the management of the Russian aggression on Ukraine starting from 24th February, we have been wanting, European Union and allies, we have taken the initiative to set the ground for the work of UNESCO on this crisis. And many of our partners in UNESCO told us, but why? You know, the issue of Ukraine is an issue, is a political issue, and UNESCO is a technical organization.
Sure.
UNESCO is a technical organization, and it should not get into politics as the UN General Assembly. So our answer was, listen, guys, the impact, the work of UNESCO, the mandate of UNESCO is impacted by this crisis. How many children, how many students, how many teachers, how many trainers are impacted by this crisis? All of them. So education in the 21st century for Ukraine in the framework of this Russian aggression is education in, is a non-education, is the education in a devastated country. Absolutely. So this is the issue. And we are, so therefore, education is, as any other issue, not so-called a development issue, but it is a peace and security issue. And it is also, the second point on this matter is that it is a sovereign, it's an issue of sovereignty. So it's also an issue where member states put their weight, their strong weight, their strategic weight. And to demonstrate that fact, many, for example, in the French Foreign Service, the issue of UNESCO has been seen, and I'm one of the advocates of understanding education as a strategic and security issue rather than a development issue. because many people in the French Foreign Service were saying, yeah, let's see UNESCO as a part of our general policy of development. And I keep telling them, listen, if you think that China, in fact, of course, China and Russia, for example, they would say it's a development issue, and we don't want to take, it's also a say that Russia has, and that some parts of the world have, that Russia, human rights, it's an issue for the rich people, so-called. It's an issue for the West, because China, as they say, they cannot afford human rights. They have to feed this so many billion population, and they don't have the luxury of human rights. And this is where precisely we don't agree, because in fact, the universality of the UN Charter and the universality of the UNESCO Constitutive Act means that everyone in the world, based on the human rights, on the UN Charter, on the UNESCO Constitutive Act, on the Universal Charter of Human Rights, Declaration of Human Rights, is that everyone in the world, developed or non-developed, everyone has the right to its to freedom, to the enjoyment of its basic rights and basic freedoms. This means that both the covenant, 1966 covenant on civil and political rights and social and economic rights are supposed to be beneficial to everyone. Everyone in the world is supposed to benefit equally this whole range of rights. And in education, everyone has the right to education. This is also an issue of the education in the 21st century, because you would have, for example, in some countries, some authorities who would say that, let's say, LGBT people are not entitled. If they say, I am an LGBT, then they are forbidden from going to school. So this is also an issue that we discussed in UNESCO, and where we disagree quite a lot, because for human rights lawyers, everyone has the right to its sexual orientation, and at the same time, right to education. So this is another issue. It's hence the education in the 21st century has to be viewed as a strategic and security issue, as a political multilateral issue where there are some differences of view, as a sovereign issue. Then yes, of course, sovereignty is discussed on the basis of what I've just mentioned, because some member states will say, yes, but we are a sovereign country, we decide who is entitled to this type of education. And here in UNESCO, of course, everyone has the right to decide, is deciding on the way it educates people, but there are some basic issues that everyone is entitled to benefit from. So those are the three areas of discussion, and those are areas where we have a bit of negotiation, if I put it mildly, every day in UNESCO. The operational daily translation of these three main axes of negotiation are, for example, I would give you 2 or 3 examples on the way we work on those issues in UNESCO. There is first, against this background of universality versus sovereignty and versus peace and security, UNESCO adopted in 1974 a recommendation on education to citizenship. And this is where UNESCO has a mandate to help, assist, encourage, engage member states in engaging. Education to citizenship means what? Means that every citizen in the world has the right to exercise its own citizenship, meaning we go back to this issue of basic human rights, meaning that every student in the world has the right to be educated socially, politically, in order to be prepared once the majority is reached to vote, to cast an informed vote. This is education to citizenship. It's also education to citizenship is also a way to be able to fight for democracy, to fight for its right, your right to vote, to draft a constitution where you will have a vote, to do these types of things, to exercise your rights as a citizen. So this was negotiated in 1974. Now, the issue has been to adapt, because some member states have mentioned that it's an old recommendation and that it should be adapted to the 21st century. And we in the European Union, we were a bit worried because we knew that this would lead to question the issue of human rights, of the definition of citizenship. And it is being done, in the negotiation is starting, and we see that trend already. Because some member states would start to say about, okay, human rights, of course, it's a given. So we don't need to write it in this recommendation. Okay,
absolutely.
So they want to delete it from the recommendation. It's basic, so we don't need to write it anymore. And we say, no way, we keep it, and it's like a Bible. This you cannot change. And then they say, yeah, but we need the important thing now is to educate. Education to citizenship is to give access to artificial intelligence. Not everyone has access to this artificial intelligence. Whereas, so there are some discussions on, yes, but the issue is not having access to artificial intelligence. This is an issue of maybe commerce or trade or something else. But on education, the issue is when you have artificial intelligence, then you need to authorize access of everyone to artificial intelligence. You need to give access to everyone to the same type of artificial intelligence material, equipment, and you need not to discriminate the access to, and then you know what the issues are. Social networks, who has access to social networks, which type of information do you put on social networks, who do you allow to put which type of information on social networks, on the internet. So these are the questions that are being discussed. So this is one of the negotiations, and you see how it is. Then there is another negotiation, which is the negotiation on the future of an institution in UNESCO, which is called the International Bureau of Education. International Bureau of Education has existed since 1925. At that time, it was not a UNESCO institution, but it was a Swiss institution, which was built on the basis of archives of Piaget, which is a Swiss pedagogue. And at some stage, Switzerland decided to donate to UNESCO those archives and to build on the basis of those archives an International Bureau of Education, which has as a specialty to assist every member state who needs it, technical assistance on the elaboration of curricula from kindergarten up to the last year of medical studies, ranging and going to, I don't know, how to become a garagist or a mechanician or something like that. So anything, any help one member state needs can be given, it's technical assistance given by UNESCO to do that. So you see that it's, in fact, it is a strategic institution, because helping each other or helping or giving assistance to a member state in elaborating its programs of teaching, in educating a whole population or a range of population, it gives you an influence on the way this population is going to grow, on the way it's going to be educated, on its mindset, of course, for the future. And at one stage, Switzerland said that this institution was not well governed, and that Switzerland was paying everything, and that they wanted other member states to contribute. So UNESCO said, okay, so let's review the governance of this institution. That was in 2015. 2017. Let's review the governance of this institution and offer the financial sustainability of this institution to every member state who is willing to do so.
Sure.
And it lasted 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. Nobody offered to contribute to the financial sustainability of this organization, which at the same time is key, as you understand. And so everybody was watching each other. Secretariat of UNESCO was not doing so much. And at some stage, Secretariat of UNESCO said, listen, nobody is putting any effort into that. So it means that that member states are not interested, or at least Switzerland is not interested in hosting it anymore. So we offer it to other member states. And Switzerland said, no way, we are interested. We just want to change the governance. But it was too late, said other member states, because they had already understood that this organization was for sale, so-called, and there had been some offered on the table. So United Arab Emirates mentioned their interest, Saudi Arabia mentioned its interest, Spain mentioned its interest, and China said, oh, maybe we can be interested at some stage. Switzerland came back strongly saying it's not to be sold, it has to be kept in Switzerland, we just want to review the governance. So at some stage it was a mess. Nobody agreed, nobody put more money, so it was again some kind of negotiation like that. And who came? China. China watched everything, everybody fighting and not putting money anymore. And they said, okay, now you guys, you have been fighting for such a long time. We are offering to transfer this body in Shanghai, and we are offering to put $8 million per year, starting from 3 years, and then we will see later. So of course, you know, there are some member states who say, okay, China is giving money, so fine, good. But for us, it was not that interesting, because first, this offer did not comply with the governance, with the governance of UNESCO, where you need to keep things located in the same area in the UN environment. So the position was that it should stay in Geneva in the UN environment, or be transferred to Paris at UNESCO headquarters. I'm not giving you the details of the negotiation, but I'm telling you this story to tell you that education is an issue of sovereignty, is an issue of influence, is an issue also of peace and security, because you can have something like that taken out of a UN context and becoming an instrument of influence. Then there were maybe one other discussion in that framework is that China proposed in this type of reasoning, saying that human rights and education, they said, but you guys, you have such a sophisticated type of education that we developing countries, we cannot afford. So this is also something that one cannot accept, because the standards of education are organized in a UN context with, for example, the education to citizenship, but also other types of standards, which are universal standards. Everyone should have, should aim at reaching those standards. And to have a double speed type of education, which would, in the sense of maybe China, be the education of the 21st century, we don't think that this is very much acceptable. So, and China proposed to split this office into two offices, this by putting in Shanghai the part for developing countries and leaving in Switzerland or somewhere else where they didn't care, the part for so-called developed countries. So creating some double standard and double speed education, which for us was not acceptable, and it's not good to create that type of a double track standards in the multilateral world. So it was a strong negotiation, and in the end we managed to reach an agreement, but it was very difficult. I had another example in mind. I just forgot. Yes, the last point I want, because I don't want to speak too long. I think it's better to interact with questions. The last point I want to make on education and sovereignty is that you know perfectly well that there are lots of areas of education when we talk about education and sovereignty, where it's kind of difficult to apprehend the reality and to know which type of education you want to give to your children, to your population. Let's take the example of Lebanon. They don't have history teaching because they don't agree on what is the history of their country. So there is no history education book agreed at national level in Lebanon. There is no history education in Lebanon. So that's the question. And also, if we talk in Europe about education, for example, the Franco-German issue. We have gone through long-term and long hours of negotiations to come to peace. Now we have lots of things in common. We have this Arte. I don't know whether because you guys are coming from all over the world. So we have this Franco-German TV, which is called Arte, and we produce joint TV programs. For us now, for my children, for young people, first they think it's a television for old people. They don't watch it. But second, it's a given. It exists. But it took so much effort from Germany and France to come to joint TV programs, you know. And in the same vein, we have created an office, a Franco-German office for youth. So there have been exchanges of youth since for a number of years, the Traité de l'Élysée, which created this scheme. And there is also a discussion, and this is why I want to mention it, on the drafting of Franco-German history books. But even now, it's not that easy. It's not that easy. I don't think that it is because there is a different reading of history, but it's a different type of competence. Here in France, it's a national education. It's a federative competence. In Germany, the landers are drafting their education programs. So there are also lots of issues to discuss on education based on the political organization of respective countries. Maybe one last point, and then I will leave it to the questions. The futures of education in the 21st century. Now you know that the UN Secretary General is adopting its 2030 agenda. What should the UN look like in the next years? And the UN has decided, and this is an issue which is taken care of by Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohamed. She is organizing, the UN is organizing a summit on education at the time of the General Assembly in September. And the issue is, and I'm going to use one phrase that she has used. I don't agree very much with this type of phrase, but she has mentioned the issue could be the decolonization of education. So what does it mean, decolonization of education? And it goes back to what I mentioned before, that some member states of the UN believe that those universality standards, human rights standards, are Western standards, and that we should reshuffle the whole thinking. So, I'm just throwing those stones into your backyards, and then we can discuss.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Your Excellency, for that inaugural address. Indeed, I have to say that one reason why we reached out to you to deliver this address was because we were expecting the linkage between a sustainable development issue, which is education, and issues around diplomacy and international politics. And what really stood out for me was your framing that education is also a strategic issue, especially when you're talking about, what happened with this institute between Switzerland and other countries, and then China coming in. I think that's a really, really interesting case study on showing the politics and the diplomacy behind, a sustainable development goal on education. So this is exactly what we try to present in our fellowship, that how all of these issues are interlinked, and you cannot really divorce public policy and sustainability in diplomacy. Now, I have a couple of questions before I invite the others to ask. One of my questions is that while I agree with you that human rights is an integral part of the education system and should be there everywhere if we want strategically a world which is in cooperation with each other and at peace, I wanted to know, how will we account for education on skills and education on various vocations when the needs of different societies and different communities are so different? Because the sort of education you would probably need in a United States of America would be very different from the sort of education that we would need in a Rwanda. So does the UNESCO have a particular stand on this? So that's my question number one. And my second question is that eventually when UNESCO is operating in conflict zones such as Ukraine, as you'd mentioned, what sort of support is UNESCO providing over there in these conflict areas?
Thank you very much. it's of course the question which is at the heart of negotiations. And when when I talk about sovereignty, I also have that in mind, that of course the needs of education and the need to provide education for skills adapted to each society, it's a real question. But at the same time, who can decide on the needs of respective societies? Each respective society decides on what it needs. What we advocate is a basic basic tools, this is what we call education to citizenship. And I talk only about the human rights, but citizenship also, this is why I was referring to the Covenant on Economic and Social Rights, because there, economic and social rights, it takes care of the various variety of societies that one has.
Absolutely.
So this is how UNESCO responds. And then on the basis of those norms that are negotiated in our general conferences or relevant conventions, then each member state decides to pick and choose or tailor those how do you say, those
recommendations from that?
Yeah, no, les matières, the classes like mathematics or physics or history to their own history and needs. So that's yes, that's the response to your first question. And how is UNESCO operating in crisis situations? This is a discussion which is very important nowadays in UNESCO, because UNESCO has been, I don't know whether it's because it has been seen or it has not been able to provide support in times of crisis. It is seen as, or many people who talk about UNESCO say that UNESCO is a norm-setting organization and is not an operational organization, and that education in times of crisis would be provided by UNICEF for children, by UNHCR for refugees, mostly those type of organizations. And you also have now the World Bank, which has stepped into this this framework with this global partnership on education, which has been put on top of all those organizations. I believe that we should not, because it applies not only to the field of education, but also to the field of culture, that it is not in the interest of UNESCO nor to its member states to disconnect norm setting from the operational capability of an organization. Because in the end, this type of disconnect leads to a vacuum in times of crisis. What has been done and what has been interesting is that COVID has been an interesting period to see how UNESCO was able to react in in this type of circumstances, because we were not able to work anymore. So were we going to work online or to stop totally working? So France, we have advocated the sustainability of the whole of UN system throughout the crisis. And we pushed not only at the Security Council, but here in UNESCO, member states to keep on working online. So we have all negotiated online and kept the rhythm of work. And in the field of education, UNESCO has worked a lot on mapping the needs of every member state, and going a lot on education online, providing content support to get education online, and on areas where, because we have to be realistic, there are lots of areas where people don't have access to online issues. So we would go through television, radio to provide some education content as much as we could. So that has been an example of a work in terms of crisis by UNESCO. Now, if we take the example of Ukraine,
yeah,
I would say that the issue is a bit, first, if we assess the situation, the war in Ukraine has led to the displacement of 12 million people inside the country, and refugees outside the country of 4.6 million. 1,500 schooling establishments have been bombarded, and 102 are totally destroyed. And we all have seen stories of poor kids living underground and waiting to see the situation improving and being able to go out and to have education. War has impacted 7.5 million children, 1.5 million youth, and 70,000 international students who are doing their education in Ukraine. And so there, the response by neighboring countries, Poland, Romania, Slovakia, the Baltic countries, has been immediate. Mm-hmm. And those children have been admitted in school immediately. There, it's the more the European Union than UNESCO, which has been working on supporting, giving funds, or if there was a need, because there was not much request of assistance. And in other crisis areas, it is, for example, let's take education in Palestine. Every organization is trying to assist. Mm-hmm. But there is no general operational scheme on education in terms of crisis. And we believe that this should be something that should be pushed. But I believe that it will be an issue that will be tackled at the summit, education summit, transforming education summit in New York in September.
Absolutely. And I think that's an interesting research areas for some of our fellows in understanding how can we improve education during the crisis. I see a few questions already coming in. So if I can invite some of the people who have written the questions to unmute themselves and introduce themselves to you, and also ask their questions verbatim if they're comfortable, then I'm going to do that. So I'm going to invite Sylvia first. Sylvia, please go ahead with your question. I think you have two of them, and you can take both of them together, please.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much. I absolutely enjoyed your presentation. I like your style. You're very strong. I am UN volunteer candidate, and I have just applied for an assignment which deals with the protection of children from Ukraine who have been displaced into Romania. I'm Romanian, but I live in the UK. And I also study animal behavior, welfare, and conservation. So I am really interested, are there any educational strategies or any universal principles, or in which education is looked at, as you said, a strategic issue in peacekeeping and security? Can we actually create educational principles that are absolutely for preventing cruelty against humans and animals. How can we implement such educational principles within the schools? Because at the end of the day, I truly believe that education will lead to less conflict. But I am really interested whether there are any specific policies, universal values within UNESCO to promote this pro-life for whatever species, human or not, and just to prevent cruelty towards them, the environment as well. Because we need to create this inclusive system of education. And for that, it's not just humans that are impacted by war. The environment is impacted, animals are impacted, wild, as well as companion animals, as we've seen how many animals have been affected. So is there a priority to promote education towards all the species and the environment and to prevent cruelty? And thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your question. Thank you for your nice words. I'm very happy to be with all of you. And I like this type of interaction because I meet interlocutors who are as strong as I am. So, and it's good because, you know, the old style of diplomacy is rather in smooth manner and putting things in a round manner. But I believe that with this type of round diplomacy, you never reach any end. We have to say the truth, and based on the truth, then you can find hopefully a common grounds. And if not, it means that too bad, you will not. But otherwise, it can very often amount to lies, and when you lie, you cannot negotiate. So I come back to your question. I'm just a bit worried of the word pro-life that you organized, that you used. So, but I don't think that it's
pro-life. I meant it in terms of protecting the lives of animals as well as animals. Absolutely nothing to do with the issue in America at the moment. I'm not talking about that. I am pro-choice for everyone. So I'm talking just protecting all species and everything that is alive rather than, you know, not.
Okay, thank you so much. And yes, we have been working in UNESCO on that. So first, there is again this recommendation on education to citizenship. So I don't know whether you have looked on the UNESCO internet site, but you have all those recommendations in the part on education, in the sector of education. Second, in the way of the willingness of adaptation to the current environment of this recommendation on education to citizenship, there is this issue of environment, of protection of the environment we live in, and this was one of the reasons which prompted UNESCO to propose member states to update this 1974 recommendation on education to citizenship. And lastly, last year, there was a specific decision on UNESCO on education and environment, including water, planet, animals, and everything, which undertakes to draft specific curricula for any member state who wants to use it in their own respective education system on education to the protection of environment. So this you can find on the internet site of UNESCO. You will have everything. But in case you don't find them, you can through our host, we can liaise.
Thank you very much for your answer. It was more because through education, we can prevent cruelty. And I think this is what the RSPCA has been trying to do in the UK, to prevent cruelty. But as much as they have, you know, taken animals away from people who were not taking care of them properly, or convicting them or taking them to court, they realize lest we have a proper educational system which in itself prevents that cruelty, we will never be able to prevent cruelty. The only thing we can do about it is to manage it. Therefore, still recording this amount of cases of cruelty and just having to deal with them in other ways. So I thought maybe we would have from UNESCO a step forward rather than just this right to citizenship, something that is more the 21st century, which actually does promote all inclusive across species, rights, because animals are individuals as well as pertaining to a species. So more present in the present,
Okay, but so then that precise, I don't think there is.
Sure, and thank you so much for your response. Let me invite Wayne, if Wayne can unmute himself and ask his question.
Yes, good. It's still good morning here. Good morning. My name is Wayne Aline. I live in the United States, Maryland. I'm a former policy advisor to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Suriname. My background is in security and defense policy, and I also have a master's degree in international business. So it's a little bit, I won't say all over, but it's with a specific goal in mind. So my question is more a strategic question that's related to future planning from the UNESCO. I typically have two questions, but I'll start with the first one. If we look at the past 2 years with the disruption of COVID and everything that is done in terms of education or letting people be able to get good education, or even in places as in Suriname or in South America where people don't have good access to internet connection or even electricity. It was really hard with COVID and all the lockdowns to have people be able to access education. And now everything is opening up again. But what is the strategic plan that UNESCO has on the way forward in terms of recovery, but also bearing in mind that future pandemics are going to happen again? So what is the strategic objective, or what is the strategic plan that the UNESCO has in place to deal with this? That's the first question. Should I go with the next question as well, or should I wait?
Yeah.
Okay, the next question is focused more on the topic that you brought up regarding AI. If we look at AI comes with a host of new security challenges. And I'm just trying to figure out what are some policies that are being discussed on the high political level in terms of dealing with these challenges, because I can give a quick example. I was reading an article last week that basically pointed out that artificial intelligence has basically already calculated that there are more than 16 million different viruses that will be coming out in the next couple of years or the next decade. So yeah, at the speed of which artificial intelligence is growing and is being used, what are the policies that are being put in place, or is there any discussion on it?
So I will start with the last question. UNESCO has been the UNESCO Director General, Audrey Azoulay, the French Director General, when she campaigned for first mandate in 2017, she offered exactly member states to think and to think together about the ethics of artificial intelligence, because for me, I feel that this is somehow a response to your question, because one needs to know what artificial intelligence can be used for and how it is being used, and to have common ground for that use. One, and second, that this common ground for that use be shared by, at the same time, civilian population, private sector, and public sector. Because now the challenge is that, in fact, we have a sector which is managed by, I'm not a specialist at all about artificial intelligence. I'm very much backward in this field, but the issue is that we have a sector which is in fact managed by the private sector totally, on which the public sector has much less regulatory power than it would like to have. Second issue is that if you want to set up a regulatory framework, then which type of common ground do you find between, let's say, China and the United States on how to regulate artificial intelligence? And third, to whom has access to who can say, this is what exactly that I said at the outset, who can say what on with the use of the international artificial intelligence, and to which aim do you use artificial intelligence? So as you said, there is a huge range of security issues and security challenges that are at stake. And of course, for the time being, there has been no possibility to regulate that space. It's a space which is totally unregulated. So Audrey Azoulay proposed at least to have some common grounds on the ethics of artificial intelligence. Which type of ethical principles do you need to do member states accept to agree jointly on for the regulation of artificial intelligence? So there has been, this document has been negotiated for 3 years, 2 years and a half, and has been agreed at the last general conference in November. You can find it on the internet site. To tell you the truth, I don't think that this document is very useful, because to find common ground between private sector, public sector, and states as diverse as the states in the planet, then you can agree on a very tiny thing. Plus, the second thing is that states agree on those things, but the private sector is not really giving much attention, in fact, to this document, which is, by the time it was agreed, it was already overtaken by the progresses of technology and artificial intelligence thinking. That's my personal opinion. So that's the response to your second question. And what is the strategic objective of UNESCO to deal with the type of disruption on education that we faced in types of COVID? The strategic objective is to equip and to make sure, I mean, the strategic objective is that no one should be left behind. That's a phrase being used by everyone, but we have to put some meaning behind it. Hence, to equip everyone, equip every member state, so that there is no disruption in terms of schooling, as we have had during the COVID crisis, where 99% of the education population was in fact deprived of education for, on average, 1 year and a half. So we are discussing that, negotiating that, and we will have again in this we have a document which is called the Futures of Education, and we will feed that into the summit in New York in September, and hopefully we will also have a framework for that.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate it. The reason I'm asking both of these questions is really from a strategic standpoint of what are we going to do? Because if you look what's happening, especially in the space of artificial intelligence, it's moving at a very rapid pace. And I feel that in terms of public policy, we are basically so behind that at the point when everything basically goes wrong, that's when we're gonna try and come up with a solution for something that's going wrong. Because in the private sector, because as I said, now I'm also moving in the private sector, we can definitely see that every time that we in the private sector are coming up with something new, that's finally when the governments or the states are finally 5 to 10 steps behind on even trying to come up with something new. And then the private sector is already moving to the next step, because what do consumers want? You have to be steps ahead. So that's the only reason why I asked these questions. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. And next we have Mr. Abhishek Raj. Abhishek, over to you.
Thank you for your key insights, Your Excellency. I'm Abhishek, a third-year undergrad student, majoring at International Relations based in India. So my question pertains to in the 21st century, education is used by nation states to create about compliance within its population and to use it as a source of legitimization. However, that use of education might compromise human rights in a certain sense, wherein when we look at China, the use of an alternate history, wherein the use of 9-dash line to create a sense of compliance within their citizens, that the Southeast Asia actually, the South China Sea actually belongs to China, is somewhat compromising human rights. So I wanted to know how UNESCO works with the nation states machinery or the national jurisdiction to create about their compliance with the universal forms of education that it propagates.
Thank you very much. Well, this is, maybe a little precision on how UNESCO works, because I keep mentioning this 1974 recommendation, but maybe it's important for you to know how we negotiate. So on the 1974 convention, because I think this is where the responses will be to your question. The member states at that time negotiated that recommendation through proposals that are drafted normally by the Secretariat of UNESCO, taking into account the reality, shared with member states, and member states will start negotiating it in the executive board, in the education commission. You have an education commission in the executive board. The executive board is 58 member states who are elected every 2 years by the General Conference. General Conference, 193 states currently, meets every 2 years. So once they meet in the Education Commission in the executive board, then they will come up with amendments, with negotiations, and so on. Normally, there is a voting procedure in case there is no consensus on an issue. An issue can be put to vote, and the issue is adopted at simple majority. So of course there is there are some member states who don't like voting at all, by tradition, I would say, and also because if there is a vote, it is a norm that will be imposed on them, which they don't like. So very often, but at the same time, there is no veto right. Because when you cannot say, there are organizations where you have a veto right. For example, I was working in the OSCE before. There, everything is adopted by consensus. It means that if one member state doesn't like it, there is nothing. In UNESCO, it's not the case. If one member state doesn't like it, too bad. If the rest, you cannot oppose it, you have either to accept or you call for the vote, but you will be sure that you will lose the vote. So you have to create majorities to get your own point of view accepted and adopted. So when you talk about the use of pedagogy as an administrative tool to create compliance with the status quo, this is at stake every second we negotiate. And when we negotiate this revision of the 1974 recommendation, every of those things that you mentioned in your question will be discussed, and it's going to be very challenging. It's going to be very difficult, I think.
Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. And let me invite Mark. Mark, if you can hear me, would you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, please?
Okay, I was asking, I think, get me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I was asking the strategies that the UNESCO has put in place to like help those people who are in the marginalized groups, like those people who are in war and also in chronic poverty, and also those people who are like in need, like those people who are disabled. So I wanted just to know if UNESCO has put in place some strategies to deal with those people so that they should be helped to access the education for free, and also if there's another way allowed in terms of some challenges they face. And if there are some challenges, I just wanted to know how are they how have they put in place like some strategies to deal with the challenges, and also some policy framework they have put in place to help those people who are in need in terms of engaging the government, I mean the public sector and also the private sector, so that they should at least work in collaboration to deal with the challenges that they face. So that's what I just wanted to know, if there are those challenges and the strategies put in place. Yeah, okay.
Thank you very much. Actually, you know, in France, we have an organization which is called I don't know whether you heard about it. It is called ATD Carmonde. Actually, I don't really when ATD means. I should look at it. Sorry, I quickly look at it. But it was created by a Christian priest, actually of Polish origin, named Father Joseph Brzezinski. And it was created to take care of people not from at that time, this sentence was used, this phrase was used of the third word, but for they call it the fourth word, ATD Carmonde. Okay, so it's agir tous pour la dignité, to act for dignity, because they found out that there are people in deep state misery, deep state poverty, and they cannot do anything. We have seen in the whole world people who are lying in the streets, and I think this is what you described in times of crisis. Sometimes it's you don't even have the strength to believe that you need education, or that if you had education, you would be in a better position. So this Father Brzezinski had identified this population as in need of a specific treatment, specific attention, and he has done an amazing work. And I'm very close personally to some people who work in this organization. And they have teamed up and they have done lots of studies in, for example, the favelas in Brazil, in some, how do you say bidonville, in some like favelas in the Philippines, in some other countries in Africa, and they have established some specific programs for really those people who are totally out of any possible scheme of education. And because I'm close personally with them, we talked, and they said that they have they want to propose UNESCO to establish a specific framework for those type of population. So we are starting to do this, but it's very difficult because member states are not very interested. They don't have the minds to look at that specific problem, because there are also psychological problems which have to be taken into account, because you can have some big programs of education, but those people would not be receptive. So you have to establish specific types of psychological skills and educations where the transmission of knowledge will be accessible to them. What UNESCO has done is that it has worked a lot on literacy. This is a big field of activity of UNESCO. It was a big aim to increase the literacy in the world, and it's also with the SDG 4, it's one of the aims, and UNESCO is the organization in charge of the implementation of SDG 4, which is access of education to all. UNESCO is very much criticized because there was a time framework for this implementation of SDG 4, but UNESCO is very criticized because it has not delivered. It is said as not having delivered enough on this thing. So there is a lot of work to be done still, lots of energy to be put, and I'm the only one who took the initiative, the French delegation with Atelier Carmonde, to propose something on this specific Carmonde. In French, we call it Carmonde. I don't know whether the expression, the phrase exists in English, but that's the thing. So it's a good question, and the answer is that what I have, unfortunately, not much.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Ambassador. And since we have just 5 more minutes left, so I'm going to invite Divya to ask her question, and that'll be the last question for the day. So Divya, over to you, please.
Good evening, Madam Ambassador. I am an advocate at Supreme Court of India with a lot of inclination towards technology, specifically disruptive technologies. My profession helps me in understanding how technology is affecting even education. And thank you for such a beautiful presentation and your talk. My query will take you back again to AI. How is EU AI Act, which has been adopted, is affecting other decisions as well as OECD AI principles, which actually take the center stage when other countries are making their AI Act? Like recently, Brazil came up with their AI Act. Similarly, Colombia and other states as well. Currently, there are almost 70 states who have AI Acts. So what do you think are they going to affect our day-to-day life when it comes to education? And keeping in mind the COVID, it has also affected the whole world. But then, like you were talking about African nations, they are also coming up with a lot of AI work. So where do you see are we going to stand as a human race against AI if we accept that AI is going to be as human as possible? And since you were talking about ethics as well, my question is obviously pertaining that aspect, that how are we going to make sure that it is ethical enough for kids to be involved while that education is being prompted to them? Because if we introduce AI in their lives, how are we going to take care of the psychological aspects? Specifically, how is AI going to disrupt the psychology of children who are our future? So that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, it is exactly what this recommendation on ethics of artificial intelligence was aiming at. Whether it has reached its aim, I'm not sure. And I invite you to look on the internet site of UNESCO. And since you seem to be very knowledgeable and specialized in artificial intelligence, and I would be interested in your feedback to see whether this recommendation will help in responding, it will be the framework to respond properly to the type of questions that you have. As you said, it's good to have anyway a recommendation. It's a recommendation on the ethics of artificial intelligence, but it's non-binding. So the question is if you personally assess that it's a useful recommendation, how do you transform it into a binding instrument and into an instrument which member states comply with? So it would have to be transformed into a convention, but then you would have we would again go a new round of negotiations, and the evolution of artificial intelligence is so fast also that if you take 3 years to negotiate, once you have finished your negotiation, your document is already out of date. And in the meantime, because we don't have a decision to have a binding instrument yet or a convention, UNESCO is putting in place with member states some schemes of cooperation to assist regulatory institutions for artificial intelligence with technical support, but also ethical support to implement this recommendation.
Divya, I think you're on mute. Yeah. All right. Well, Divya, I hope that answers your question. And with this, we come to an end of today's event. We are looking forward to the journey of the fellowship over the next 3 months. And a big thank you from the whole of the Global Policy, Diplomacy and Sustainability Fellowship team to you, Ambassador Lacan. Again, I have to say that it has been a true privilege interacting with you today. And I found personally, and I'm sure everybody over here found your discussions to be full of insight, because a lot of times when we hear about education, we don't hear about what happens in the background to get all of these things, all of these agendas defined, and all of the programs implemented. And I think that your discussion added a lot of nuance to what we are probably going to be discussing over the next 3 months. And for that, I'm extremely, extremely thankful to you. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you very much. Good luck for the next 3 months. And if you need anything, I'm available.
Absolutely, absolutely. And in fact, you had mentioned about a conference that is taking place. Was that probably in Rio? So if there's any civil society participation in that or in any other UNESCO conference, since we are experimenting with a new model of education where everything is online, and this is about policy, diplomacy, and sustainability with people coming from over 10 to 12 different countries every cohort, I think that we have a new model to offer and a new model to discuss with the world. So we'd be more than happy to partner in any way that we can. Thank you, Your Excellency.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
You have a nice day. Bye-bye.